see more people are joining. Okay, that's great. Barbara, please assist me to just allow as we go on. All right. So good evening once again, and welcome to the Board Office Hours event. The title of this session is called Ask Anything About What Decades in Leadership Teach Us About Boards, Power, and Governance. So today our guest speaker is Mr. Ntobi Chikamsazwe. So he is, I'm gonna describe, his profile just in a few minutes time. My name is Taka. I'll be hosting this session. Just before we start as well, please note there is going to be a question and answer session at the end of the webinar where you can, if you've got any questions, you'll be able to ask. Also, just be in mind that this webinar is brought to you by Anivel. We are based here in Pretoria. Right, just for housekeeping purposes, please, use your name. I know we are in Teams, use your actual name so that we can also address you with your name in the event that you want to communicate. Also, you're welcome to use the chat function at the bottom. If you've got a question, you want to comment, you can drop in a chat, and then, the rest of the group will be able to get your message. Also, keep your mics muted at all times during the session. And if you want to say something, please put up your hand and we'll give you a chance to speak, where you'll be able to unmute, and then you can go ahead. In the event that you get disconnected, please use the same link that you used to get into the event again, then connect again into the event. Right. Before I introduce the speaker, I just want to go through a few announcements from ourselves as Anivel Advisory. So our King 4 to King 5 webinar is now available on demand. So if you want to just get more detail in terms of the transition from King 4 to King 5, the webinar is available on demand. You can go on this website as indicated and you'll be able to access it. Actually, I'm going to put the link in the chat for you so that you can access the webinar. If you've not yet read this book, Road to Non-Executive Directorship, please get a copy of this book. It's a fantastic book with practical steps that will allow you to transition your career into the boardroom. The tips that are in this book are practical, and we've got a lot of feedback that we've received from various people saying, no, this is something that is different. This is not just, for marketing purposes, but this is practical and real. So if you want to get a copy of this book, you can get it on various, as indicated below, on Amazon, on Takealot, and also on takasunday.com. This book is also available. Again, this is a free gift just for you, with a lot of advice and a lot of information for those who are serving in boards, for those who are serving in board. This is a free book. You'll be able to access it as well on the website, takasunday.com. Just go there and you access it for free. We also have other products like board CVs and LinkedIn profile service that we also provide. So if you want us to assist you with a board CV, please get in touch with us. We'll be able to customize your CV for board purpose and also help you update your LinkedIn profile just to get boards positioned. If you are not aware, please be just note that our magazine, The Director, is the first issue was released last month, and you should be able to get also this issue again for free. So this magazine is making a lot of impact. A lot of people are giving feedback that it's really quite interesting, and the information in this magazine is relevant. So you're welcome to go on the website, thedirector.co.za, and then you can subscribe so that you can get the next issue of the magazine, right? Then lastly, from my side, we have got a director mentorship program that is coming with the classes that are starting early August, the first week of August. I've got a short video that's just 1 minute, 2 minutes that I just want to show you. Please just give me a second as I change my screen. Just a second to just share with the sound. Okay, where is the video? Video is gonna be just a minute, and then just to give more information on our director mentorship program. All right, let's go for it. Just before I hand over to Mr. Mtobi, some leadership lessons are not found in textbooks. So you can't read them in books. You can't find them in governance codes or even in board manuals. They are learned over decades in difficult rooms, high-stake conversation, complex institutions, in boardrooms, in public platforms, and in moments where judgment matters more than titles. That is why we have invited Mr. Mtobi to this board office hours to learn from his experience. He's an experienced board leader, executive advisor, a mentor with decades of leadership, governance, and institutional experience. This session is gonna bring decades of wisdom from engaging with various leaders, senior leaders, including, just to preempt, Madiba, Thabo Mbeki, and other, senior politicians, but still he remained dedicated in serving. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Mr. Mtobi. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. Colleagues, that's me there. We're starting the session with me talking about the issues that have been raised. Just to kick off, how did we come to today? I am relating to the decades because I already have reached 70. So I qualify to talk about the decades. And I'm a retiree at the moment. And I've been trying to find things to do because nobody would hire a 72-year-old person. So I thought the best way is to look for boards. My son, who happens to be Mtobi as well, we call him Junior, felt sorry for me, and he decided to introduce me to Taka Sande here. And when I was meeting Taka, I thought, oh, now I'm going to be placed in a board. And and we were looking forward to the session. And we started talking. I started telling him my life history. I think he found it interesting so much that he thought I should share it with you today. And the way I want to present it is in the form of a case study. My understanding is that the audience includes men and women who want to go into boards, and those that are in boards who want to advance further in their careers. And I'm coming from totally a different route, and as such, our conversation today will help us get to some understanding in terms of what I can pick up from you and what you can pick up from me. The heading, as I've said, is a heading that perhaps is something that came from Taka. And I was so surprised. The heading looked quite heavy when I said, oh, this looks very important, but that's how he decided to come up with. And in terms of my case study, then is really to talk about myself and see how we link it up to both at the end. I come from the Eastern Cape. I've worked in that area, starting with the Ciskai government, who gave me a bursary to study a BSc at Forte, and I worked in the to work off the bursary. After that, I joined a few companies, including General Motors in Port Elizabeth, and I was at General Motors where I got a scholarship from the Ford Foundation. They were in the business of trying to take what they call future leaders to the United States, train them in the hope that when they get back in business, they'll be kind to American companies. So that's how I got there. I was in Ohio, Bowling Green State University, where I acquired an MBA. Coming back home, I thought, you know what Americans do? They pump you up with confidence so much that you don't believe there's anything you cannot do. And I was walking like that at the airport, getting to home until I reached the arrivals, and they took off my suitcase and threw all my stuff. Then I remembered that this is what I missed over the last 2 years. And I said, well, some of what my confidence was starting to dissipate because of the way I was treated at the airport. But having said that, I came back to King Williamstown where I was residing. What then happened is that I followed the club, a rugby club in Eastern Cape. Rugby is a very important sport. So I joined this rugby club, and it had two Springboks in it. So I was like, yo, these guys are good. Then little did I know that I'm going to end up being the general secretary of that club. That's my first entrance into a board situation. We used to have meetings of the club. Very soon, I was the district general secretary, then the provincial, which is Border Rugby Union, the general secretary. And my career was moving on that NGO side, which was obviously no thanks to Mr. Mluleki George, who decided to nominate me to these positions. And I really got into the rugby administration scene through that interaction. And then I was then starting to juggle now the sports side as well as the business side. And in doing so, I was appointed by Johnson and Johnson, and they were sympathetic to my cause in rugby, so they gave me a line where I could have all my rugby interactions during break time and lunchtime. So it was that my career was at work for Johnson and Johnson. Outside work, it was doing the administration for the sport of rugby. So I was juggling these two different streams. It became impossible at some stage as both volumes were increasing, to the extent that the sports side was starting to demand more of my time than the business side. What happened, just to just give one or two examples, is that I had to go, for example, to New Orleans. They wanted a speaker from South Africa to discuss why South Africa should be allowed back to participate in international competition. And I left on a Friday. Those days we used to go via Zurich. And I had to be back in the office on Monday. And that's what I did. I went to speak there straight away in New Orleans. Uh, had to go quickly to see Preservation Hall. That's where Louis Armstrong was known to be staying, and quickly addressed the conference and back to the airport. By Monday, I was in the office, so tired, and I was starting to say it's perhaps impossible to juggle the two together. Then the second instance that was causing a difficulty for me was that I was invited to come to speak in Johannesburg in something called the Cricket Society. My boss, who was the HR director, told me he was going to Joburg to a meeting. Little did I know we were going to the same meeting. And and he said he was surprised when the guest speaker was introduced. The guest speaker is Mtobi James. He says, but I left Mtobi in the office. And that's how I've realized that now I'll have to break ranks now and start to choose between the two, because sport was more dominant than the business. We decided to align ourselves with the developments that were happening in South Africa. And in that time, political organizations were banned, and sport was kind of a vehicle that was used to such an extent that our sport entity, which was the National Sports Congress, was seen as the ANC in tracksuits. And because our program was going to be resting on the pillars of development, unification, and preparation, we felt that we need to unify all the various sports bodies. In South Africa at the time, if there's soccer, there's a soccer for whites, a soccer for colored, soccer for Indians, and soccer for Africans. So our task was to combine all those things on a non-racial basis. And the simple method was we get these three parties or four parties in a room and say, what things are you having in common? What things do you have that are different? And the list of the things in common was always longer than the list of those things that are not in common. And in that basis, we started to define the rules after we had done the sessions. So much that we sounded very clever after these unity talks, because we started talking about, no, we don't want the kind of unity that is oil and water. They are same test tube, but they are separate. And then we said we want milk and water type unity. Same test tube, but both parties integrated together. So that was what we were doing. And we started with the big sports. Started with football, then we went to cricket, then we went to rugby, and we were unifying them on a non-racial basis. In that context, we had our impact grew, and we got recognition continentally and even internationally as the sports people who were sports administrators who represented South Africa. Bear in mind, the South African government was already there with its own Department of Sport, but we were getting the invitations as the National Sports Council. I'm raising this because of the impact that we were having and decisions, the level of decision making that we're making. At that stage, the anti-apartheid movement was banning everything to do with South Africa. So we were the people that were kind of had the key for South Africa to come back in international sport. And so it was, we launched our organization at a conference in Wits in 1989. Was the time when the president of the International Olympic Committee was in South Africa. And he's the one who's known for actually banning South Africa from participating in international sport in the Olympics. And he wanted to be the first one as well to reopen it. So he was asking, when I'm saying we, in the main, it was me and Mluleki George who were doing the traveling and visiting these countries. So he asked us, when do you want? You want to go? So you want South Africa to come in by 92? If you want us to go by 92, I can open for them to come in 92. And that was how South Africa actually was allowed back into the Olympic movement. In 1992, they sent a token team to participate, and that team, well, was greeted with joy all over the world. and we had to discuss the matter of what emblem to use, such as to show the impact of the decisions that we're making. We decided when South Africa would come back to the Olympic movement, we decided what logo and emblem that they were going to use. And on that basis, South Africa was actually rejoining the community of nations. Countries like Australia and New Zealand started not to allow anyone who goes and participate in sport, because South Africa, and particularly the white colleagues, would go to these countries as visitors, and then they group together to form teams when they are there. So in New Zealand and Australia, they would say, we want a letter from the National Sports Council. You know, people can find letters the way they do, but eventually they said the letter must be signed by Mtobi or Nduleki. That I said, this is serious power now, that we got the power to allow a whole country or not to allow it. Even parents would come and say, please allow my child, he's been selected to participate. And we said, no, there are preconditions to international competition. And those preconditions were unity, development programs, and preparation for post-apartheid sport. So it was that as a NGO, we were so much involved in those matters that we had to start preparing for what will happen post the boycott. We were always asked, when will the conditions be right for South Africa to get back into international sport? And our response was, when change is profound and irreversible. So you could see some people didn't like us, some people liked us. And on that basis, South Africa was allowed. So intense was the boycott of South Africa that once we went to see the anti-apartheid movement in sport. There were organizations, the names also were intimidating. One organization from Sweden was Isolate South Africa Campaign. Then we were saying, sure, this boycott is stronger than we ever thought. I mean, they even make it jobs that are permanent in terms of their role is to isolate South Africa whenever it happens. And at the end of it, we had to choose an emblem. And personally, I preferred this, this Namibian emblem, which was the dolphin. And then everyone was giving their views, and at the end, a Protea was chosen. And I was, as a general secretary, I had to go and announce that we love the Protea. I didn't like it at all, but I had to conform to the instructions that you must go and tell the public that you love why we chose the Protea. And in that time, Mr. Mandela was meeting the IOC president, and he was asked, have you decided on the emblem? He said, didn't you hear? It's the Protea. And that's how we got that big endorsement from someone no less than Mr. Mandela. And then as things went on, we were surprised when Mr. de Klerk made those announcements unbanning the political organizations, and everything started to change in the country. And we were the sports wing. And at that time, we were in the middle of a boycott of the cricket, the Gatting tour. Mike Gatting was coming with the British side to come and play. And we had to tell them to stop now. We were busy protesting against this visit when we got a message that you guys stop this thing now because big things are happening. Organizations are going to be unbanned. So the link with the politicians was created in those ways. And as an NGO, we actually played our modest role in those decisions that got South Africa back into international sport. From the NGO level, I was then catapulted into the government side. 94, changes in South Africa. The ANC was in government, and all they said, hey, we don't have a sports policy. We'll take your sports policy, National Sports Council, to be the policy of the country. So that's how we did those things. We started getting involved in developing the policy, which we already had, and then we established all the services that we didn't have as a country. And some of those entities that we established, like the Institute for Drug-Free Sport, I had to be the chairman of those because there's nobody else who are establishing them. The Sports Trust, all those kind of sports science institute. So we were creating all those entities that were not there for a country now that was back in international sport. So it was 95, we had the Rugby World Cup. And what story I can share with you on that one, Mr. Mandela was going to make a speech in Cape Town. And in his speech, the speech from the presidents would also pass the Department of Sport. And all I did was to insert one sentence in the speech. And that sentence was that it is the last time that people of color will be participating only as spectators. And then when Mr. Mandela was reading the speech in Cape Town, you know, Mr. Mandela tends to pause in certain places, not in the places we know. So he started to say, when the whole country was chanting, Nelson, Nelson, and he started to say, this is the last World Cup. And he stopped. Then the cheering turned to boos. Ooh, why is it the last one? Then he says, where people of color. So the pause was probably not in the right place, but that's how he spoke. So we remember that sentence, and because everybody was responsible for the speech, they started asking, who added that statement? I said, who? I was not going to disclose that I was the one who put in this statement. But what I'm trying to show is that we were using the power of persuasion to change the course of events in the country through the medium of sport. So that was a digressing that I thought I should make there. Then there was the issue of this Dr. Louis Late in rugby. He was busy wanting to use the old emblem and the old anthem. And then we had to stop the tour and stop he dead on his tracks to say the New Zealand and All Black and Australia will not be coming to South Africa if you play that emblem. And he had to change and start playing that other anthem. They played. He did not play. He played Nkosi Sikelel. That's how we got the country to a standstill. At that time, Boipatong was burning, and we said we are actually going to stop all international competition until the issues in Boipatong are addressed. So you could see that we started to take a space that was not ours, a political space, because we were sports people. One of the other, well, that's my public sector role. Amongst that, those things that happened at that time, there were commissions of inquiry that we conducted. One was in football, which Judge Picard, and we turned the face of football to actually reflect a non-racial entity. We did the same in the other sports. What then happened was a dossier that was presented by one gentleman called Brian van Rooyen, and he was complaining against the South African Rugby Football Union. That was a big issue in South Africa because we ended up having a commission of inquiry into the affairs of rugby. I had to be, as Director General, to chair a task team. This task team I'm mentioning for a reason of the names of the people that were involved. One of them was Dr. Mervyn King and Michael Katz, and I'm sure some of you will know these names, and then Gilbert Marcus and Dina Malindi. That was the team that was probing the affairs of rugby. We found ourselves in court because what happened is that Minister Chwete had met with Mr. Mandela, and Minister Chwete managed to convince Mr. Mandela that rugby was, the affairs of rugby were not conducted well. And what then happened was that I was asked in court, you wrote a letter, a press statement that said Mr. Mandela has agreed to have a commission of inquiry in rugby. I say, yes. Were you in the meeting? No. Did Mr. Mandela speak to you? No. So you are lying. I said, maybe because Mr. Chwete told me what happened at the meeting. But isn't that fraudulent behavior? Are you not fraud? Are you involved in fraud? Are you still in your job? Unfortunately, once the name fraud is mentioned, my grandma, my mother-in-law in the Eastern Cape, assumed once the fraud is mentioned, she said, oh, why did he really need the money that he stole? I said, but what money did we steal? They couldn't understand the connection of the word fraud. And obviously, she thought I had stolen some money, and that was kind of quite interesting. But the killer was this SABC lady called Notolo Grootboom, because she was relating what happened. And then she says, as for the director general, he is a liar. He doesn't tell the truth. But when you say that in Xhosa, it becomes quite hectic. Uli mene, uli toki, and all that. And all I did was to say in the press statement that Mr. Mandela had called for a commission of inquiry into rugby. The long and short of it, we did have the commission, and at the end of it, the outcome of the case was very small in the newspapers because it had overturned I mean, when you had another time, I will tell you about the court case, but the court case was also itself a classic because Mr. Mandela was subpoenaed, I was subpoenaed, Minister of Sport, Mr. Chwete, was subpoenaed to give evidence. And on that evidence, the rugby situation had helped demonstrate that Mr. Mandela, as a president, is not above the law. And in a sense, the long and short of it, I was criticized as someone who caused problems because I said something like, because I was not at the meeting, I then wrote a statement quoting someone in inverted commas. Then they asked, why did you put it in inverted commas if you were not in the meeting? So I said it was just an honest lie. And if some of you, when they Google and they look at the case of South African Rugby Football Union versus the president of the country, you will see that that's a classic. There's nothing called an honest lies. Lies are lies. So that was something that I got in trouble for. Just telling you that we were part of these big developments happening in the country. People like Steve Chwete, Ali Baha, Sam Ramsamy, Arnold Stofile. I often wondered, why am I with these heavyweights? These guys are big guys and all they are well important. They are politicians. You will laugh that these guys didn't really get along. And that's why I think I was there, because they were all talking to me. And one would say, go and tell him this, another one, go and tell them that. So that was my role there, to run around and convey these messages. And what happened then was we hosted the 7th All Africa Games. It was now Mr. Thabo Mbeki's term, and he was known for African Renaissance. And we were bringing Africa to Johannesburg. Africa is gathering was the logo. And we hosted it successfully. Very cold night in Johannesburg. And there's also drama there, because that's when we saw the shortcomings of a country that was developing. For example, we used the taxis to carry the players, and the taxis, we didn't want to move with the player until the taxi was full. But we want the players in the field. So we had to tell, no, you must take him even if it's empty, you must take them. And there's this auntie who says he could do catering for the teams. 52 countries were participating, and this lady didn't even have was cooking from her own kitchen. So needless to say that we're having problems of catering, because players want food, but this lady is cooking from her stove at home. So we had to speak to FETIC to say, please help this lady. She can work for you, because we're busy running the sport. So there was that drama about how these things were happening. And in the end, the public sector side of it was that kind. And if you look at these gatherings, these meetings that were meeting, they were making decisions around the country. For example, on the rugby emblem, Mr. Mandela was subpoenaing us to come and talk to him about the emblem, because his preference was something else. And a lot of people would have heard that we sat there thinking that we're going to convince him to change his mind. And he spoke and he told us straight away that he's not going to beg us and we're going to do the right thing. And at the end of the day, he says, we must go and tell the media what we had agreed. But we didn't agree anything. You, the only one who spoke. So Mluleki George was giving the report to the media. We agreed to the Springbok emblem, and well, we didn't agree, but Mr. Mandela did agree. So because he showed us that we can't be fighting about rugby when the whole country was actually, he was dealing with people like Constant Fillion. So our cause was much smaller than his main cause. So that was the impact of the decisions that we were taking, that we obviously the Springbok emblem became the theme now. Now we were having the Protea on the other side and the rugby guys at the Springbok. Now we were having a discussion with rugby people. Where do we put the Springbok and where do we put the Protea? So they first put the Protea under the Springbok, and our black side said, no, it can't jump over the Protea. Then they said, let's put it on the head of the Springbok. And they said, no, but there's no Springbok that's got a flower on the head. So those were the kind of discussions which were actually quite hilarious, because these are serious people talking about these kind of things in terms of shaping the future of the country. That was really that element that we had of hosting then at the end the seventh All Africa Games at the time when it was Mr. President Begi. So unsophisticated were we that I only realized that I had to give a speech at the opening ceremony when Mr. Begi was saying, when I'm speaking, when Toby's speaking, where are we standing? I said, am I making a speech? So I had to quickly go and sort out what I'm going to say. But fortunately, the good Lord who had sympathy on us, we did make a good impression with the seventh All Africa Games. Then we joined, then I was working for Vodacom. I started being the chairman of the foundation. And then that's where I started understanding the people who are in the private sector, how they hold their meetings. Our meetings in sport, you could kind of say they were informal meetings. They were not driven by rules, but we were making decisions. And now we are supposed to have rules, and you can't say this and this. We basically were dictating. I mean, after all, I was Director General of the country. There was not a single act of law, but people were doing what we were saying. We were running the sport in the country without a law. I remember Steve Chete says, when are we going to have a law in sport? Because other departments have got the laws. So I had to quickly find, oh, and then we had that there's a green paper, there's a white paper, there's this. So we had to quickly find a way of doing these things. So the point I'm making is that we did things. We were not hampered by processes and procedures to get those things done. And these things happened, and the country did not collapse. The country was like a big sporting nation, and we believe that we played our bit whilst there was a political impasse, or the political organizations were still banned. So my first experience then on what I call the formal side of business was chairing the Vodacom Foundation. And there quickly I started finding out that I need to summarize after every discussion that has happened. In our sport days, we didn't really summarize things. So some people thought this is what was agreed. Others said, no, this is what was agreed. So I realized that I'm not a good chairman because I don't do the summary at the end. I said, oh, must you also summarize? Okay, you must summarize. So that was one lesson. The other one was the CEO of Vodacom sat in the Vodacom Foundation, and I'm chairing the Vodacom Foundation, and he would pull out his position, like him making decision, and people are looking at him. I had to say, hey, yeah, the chairman is here. You must look at me. So he would make decisions in the meeting with the CFO, and they would, on the fly, they would make those decisions. And then that's when we said, I think we must call the IOD. There's something wrong with governance around this thing. In the meeting, I am the chairman. He's not the CEO. He can't pull the CEO in my meeting. So that's IOD quickly told us that, yes, no, Mr. CEO, that's not your meeting. You must listen to the chairman. So he said, but the chairman doesn't make decision. He doesn't summarize. And say, well, train your chairman how to be a chairman. So those were the kind of things now on the formal side of things. we were not used to these formal meetings because our meetings were basically informal, but we took all the decisions. We even selected teams. If the selection panel was not making a good job, we said, no, we are the people who introduced the quotas because we said, no, teams from South Africa can't be teams like they come from Europe. We must have some blacks in the teams and we must have a minimum of so many blacks. That's how we were running the situation down there. So I ended up then having executive roles at Vodacom as well. And then the 2011 Rugby World Cup, Vodacom donated my services to go and chair the Rugby World Cup for bid for 2011, which we didn't get, but the CEO was Francois Pinard at the time. And then they also donated me to chair Boxing South Africa. And so you could see that they were working on the basis that Vodacom doesn't just sponsor only in cash, it also gives money. And that was the end of my life at Vodacom. And then post that retirement at Vodacom, I worked for an entity called Mineco. Mineco is a placement agency, but they gave me the portfolio of board advisory services. So we must actually help chairpersons how to chair meetings. We must help how board members should behave in a board meeting, and. So that was where I spent most of my time. Then I started chairing some parastatals. I chaired an organization called CISOS, Community Schemes Ombud Service. Those are the people who if you get a bill in the estates that you stay in, you'll see CISOS levy. That was the organization that it is an alternative dispute resolution entity. So in an estate, if people have got dogs and dogs are barking, those are the kind of things that we were adjudicating over. Then I became special advisor to the Minister of Sport, Arts and Culture. And up to now, I still participate as an ordinary member in the Vodacom Foundation and in Francois Pinard's Make a Difference Foundation. I'm raising these because those are the things that I sit on those boards. And now wearing the cap now, that is, I'm a learner, I'm almost like an outsider because their argument is that you're coming from informal sector. Sport is an informal sector. Charities are not really mainstream business. So I started to say, I'm feeling frustrated because I feel discriminated against, and that was really how it happened. And in terms of trying now, when I talk about boards, in terms of trying to be part of the boys, firstly, government and parastatals, they still do a good job of advertising for positions on the board. The private sector doesn't, because by the time we hear there's a vacancy, they're already appointing someone. And they always select amongst the same group of people. And you say, how do you break into this group? You can't break into this group because you only hear that there's a vacancy when the vacancy is being filled. And it looks like they talk to each other in the golf field, and so it is a struggle that I'm finding myself dealing with now, that struggle of exclusion. Because remember, I bucked the trend. I started sitting in meetings and boards before I learned the rules of running meetings and doing that. Whereas other people first, they go and they're told, okay, if you want to be in a board, there is be a director course, 1 to 5, run by the IOD. You must run and do that. And then I did that, and I did it twice. And then they say, oh, now you need to have had executive level experience. So executive. So you can't come straight from school into a board. No, no, no. You need experience first, and you need to. No, I say, but the decisions that you make in those boards are less impactful than the decisions I made in sport. So I'm being discriminated against because my decision-making capacity is not in doubt, but I can't leapfrog and jump into the boards because you want people from referrals that, oh no, we are having a vacancy in the board. They ask another one. Oh yeah, he's a good guy. He's always been in our board. You can use him. So it rotates around the same kind of people. And then one wonders if there's no room. For example, they say after the be a director 1 to 5, you can then sit an exam for certified director. And then you, after that, if you build a big portfolio, you become a chartered director. And I was thinking, but I think I qualify to be a chartered director. I not happy to, because if you're looking at the decision making, the decision that these guys are making is just for the one country. We made decisions about many sports bodies, many countries, and so that to me is still a disservice that is done. I'm sure I share that in common with some of you that we should really try and reform the way boards are selected and appointed, because just like we lost a lot of expertise in not having blacks in boards and not having women in boards. Now, there are people who are being discriminated against because of the backgrounds that we have. And now I want to know, there's something called RPL, recognition of prior learning. I say, why can't that be utilized to our advantage so that we can get into boards at the right level? So the whole issue of exclusivity is an issue, because uh, uh, one thing to be a freedom fighter on the outside, but perhaps we need to. I saw some of the services that Taka is offering is to build up profiles for LinkedIn, and that perhaps we need to make a strong case for those kind of backgrounds that the boardroom is missing, because it's excluding them because they trust what has been done before. They're not wanting to be experimenting with a new order of things as such. And therefore the experience that we had throughout my entire life doesn't count, because it's informal, because it is you don't meet the criteria to be either a chartered director or certified director unless you do these courses and that. Anyway, the issue was to go through what I went through and to show how it actually disadvantages us and people like me in getting into the boards that require perhaps that kind of empathy, that kind of understanding of the communities that they were not part of. And that is really where I leave it. And in terms of the topic, I thought I said something on the decades and related to the match, to my age, and then I looked at these leadership portfolios that we've had that are big decisions by any standard. And then we just spoken about the power that we had as an NGO dealing with things that dealing with other countries as equals, and the issues of the governance lapses that we've had, and the discrimination that I ended up talking about. And we need to have time to just also listen to your comments and interaction. I will say that is my story and I stand by it. Thanks, Taka.
Yes, yeah, it's quite a lot. It's quite a lot. I don't know where to start from. I also have my own questions as well. But ladies and gentlemen, we have no choice but to extend this session. It's quite a lot. If you have got any question, please just put up your hand and then we allow you to ask. I think you can see from the conversation, this is pre-94 executive and post-94 executive. So this is quite something, managing both sides of the story, and you did very well. Any questions from the audience? You can just put up your hand and then we'll give you an opportunity. Maybe as we wait.
Just want to make comment. Yeah.
Yes, if you can't put up your hand, you can just unmute and go for it.
I am unable to raise my hand from my gadget, but
yes, Sakiwe, you can go ahead.
Good evening to Mr. Mtobi Chamzashe, yourself, and the leaders in the group. Good Good afternoon to you all. Mr. Mtobi Chamzashe is my hero. I participated in the National Sports Congress representing a region called Transkei at the time. And without being told what to do, but looking at the leadership of people like Mr. Mtobi Chamzashe, I still feel bad that he's still a mister. I think universities by now, because of the good work he has done, should have given and granted him a doctor of philosophy degree in the area of sport. His contribution is immense. And I stand to acknowledge the excellent presentation he has made tonight, and he is an excellent orator. I have two questions. I respect greatly the work he has done with his peers in the country, but I have just two questions. The first question is on the honest lie. I still do not think that it was a lie. Probably in a court of law, it could be taken as a lie. But for me, it was an honest assertion, because how would a director general doubt the assertion of his immediate principal, the minister? Because the director general takes orders from his minister. So yes, in a court of law, it might have been considered a lie. But the reality is, all what he said was honest. And it was more of an honest assertion than an honest lie. That one is a comment. Then the one last thing I want to raise on the sport facilities. Sir, I know that part of the challenge that made you to stand up and resist apartheid was the fact that our people, particularly the Africans, were playing in substandard facilities. And part of the challenge was to reverse that tide. My interest now would be, in your view, to what extent has the National Sport Congress or the National Sport Council or even the Department of Sport and Recreation South Africa, when you're Director General, how much has it done in the regard of creating sport facilities? And if it has not done much, what could have been the challenges? Am I still audible, sir?
Yes, you are loud and clear.
Thank you. So that's my comment. Thank you very much, Mr. Chamzashe. And I don't know what could still be done, sir, to ensure that the universities in our country accord you what you deserve, a Doctor of Philosophy degree in the area of sport. Your contribution and the contribution of your peers is immense. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, sir, you can go ahead. You can unmute and go ahead.
I want to unmute now. Good God.
As you are busy with that, Mr. Mtobi, you can respond to this one.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Sodo, as you have guessed, was one of our lieutenants during those days, and what he was saying is what we went through together. Unfortunately, a lot of those people that were there are passing on now, and the sad thing, as we tend to do, is that we don't write, and this whole history is a history that is in people's heads, and it's dying with the people as they are dying right now. The issue of the honest lie is an interesting thing. I thought you need more time to hear about it, because Zapiro had had a cartoon where Mr. Mandela was sitting and having a drink from a jug, and there were two people with a watering can written poison. They kept on pouring as Mr. Mandela was drinking. So the message was that we were poisoning Mr. Mandela's mind to take a position against rugby and investigate the affairs of rugby. So that was how Zapiro saw it. He did another cartoon which was worse, where he projected me as a snake and Mr. Chwete as a what do you call it, an owl. And they said he changed his sports so quickly, and I was actually slippery as a snake in the court case. So that was the. Otherwise, all I was saying was that if I'm watching television with my family and my son says something there, and then my wife says, no, you can't do this thing. Is my wife lying? That's what I was asking. Clearly,
Yes.
you do not. I said, she's not lying. I didn't say I don't like what my son was doing, but she knows that I wouldn't like it.
Yeah.
So is she a liar? Is she fraudulent? Is she this and this? I was told all those things, and I felt so bad that I'm such a terrible person, because when people tell you the same thing, you start to believe it. So that lie was actually my best answer I could give, that I wasn't there at the meeting. I heard what was discussed at the meeting. So whatever, if I was lying, I was actually conveying the sentiments expressed to me by minister, and therefore it was an honest lie. And he jumped on that. Are the lies that are honest and the lies that are not honest? Anyway, in terms of sports facilities, that's always a big problem. During our time, we argued that it's not actually, South Africa has got more sports facilities than any of the countries up north put together. And the problem is the location of the facilities. They were not located where the majority of the people are. And as a result, the backlog that we're talking about now, it needs to shift from building facilities into transporting people to where the facilities are. But right now, I believe there are interventions like MIG that actually are funds earmarked for sports facilities in the municipalities. But the problem, municipalities have got bigger problems, so they use the money for sports facilities for other things. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you so much, sir, for your response. I see, Siba, your hand is up. You can go ahead. Siba, we cannot hear you. I see your device is unmuted, but we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now, Taka?
Yes, you are now live now. We can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. First of all, good evening to you, Taka, and good evening to Mr. Jamzashe, as well as to the colleagues that have joined us. I think the first point is to really add to what the previous leader has spoken about in recognizing Mr. Jamzashe. I know him from television, to be honest. So he is, I must concur, he's actually my hero as well. I'm actually glad that Taka has blessed us with this presentation and invited Mr. Jamzashe to talk to us. So I think I also support Mr. Soto, who spoke about without obviously knowing whether he has had honors, but I don't remember. I'm speaking for myself now. I haven't heard that Mr. Jamzashe was honored as he correctly should be, and I think there's quite a few of other people, and as he obviously given the context at which he was acting in those roles and in the context of the country, I think there should be some way of recognizing the timing, as well as obviously if we integrate that experience in the country and what their roles have been, but also integrating into the experience or the practice of directors and the practice of people, of leaders in the boards in the country, taking into account our history, which is the point that Mr. Jamzat has correctly alluded to in the last points that in his presentation. So I fully support that there should be a focus on that. I think the second point, whether it's a question or a comment, anyone can interpret it, is for me, currently I'm in the Eastern Cape, as I come from the Eastern Cape, but I practice extensively in the corporate in Gauteng. So I have an interest in I think Mr. Jamzat mentioned a lot about the sports or the non-governmental sector, particularly sport. So I have a passion in really being involved in development, in what we can call rural development. I know there should be a distinction because there's been a lot of focus in integrating township development into the mainstream economy. But there seems to be a neglect in terms of rural development because it is quite distinct to the characteristics in the townships. And that's another point that I want to link to what the previous leader has spoken about in terms of the sports facilities. In rural areas, I notice, and this is just my experience, lived experience, is that there is an even bigger gap, disadvantage in terms of not having the facilities and not having the support, not just from government, but also from the corporates. I think the rural areas are neglected in terms of that. And there's something that, in terms of this topic of that Mr. Jamzat spoke about, in terms of being involved without necessarily really being dependent on the qualifications. Yes, we need qualifications or we need certification, which in the area of board directorship is being provided by established institutions. But on that same note, we must also encourage and applaud yourselves, Taka, and other individuals who are doing training, who are running programs because we want to bridge the gap. So I also want to mention that point, but the point I wanted to raise as well, or the question that I'm inviting Mr. Jamzat to comment about, is this issue of, just to add to his last point, is how do we integrate not just sport, but to level the playing field across the country, because the country has had sectors or areas that are far ahead, whether you look in terms of commerce and industry or sports or other areas of development. There is still a massive gap between what I think former President Mbeki would call a first world country and a second world country within the same country. So that's the area that I'm very aware of, and I would love to contribute in terms of knowing that obviously boards play a critical role in terms of impact above the executive roles that we always develop and want to achieve for our personal. But for boards, the focus is mostly for communities, for the country, and for a greater good. So I think let me leave it at that. I hope that you do understand my comment and my question, and leave for other leaders. Thank you very much, Taka.
Okay, thank you so much, Siba, for your input. I'm gonna allow Mr. Mtobi to just, you talked about summarizing, so I think this is the chance as the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also acknowledging the comments made about these sessions, Taka, and the services provided by the organizations that you are involved in. I think we really need to stop complaining about things now, but just do some things to resolve them. Because someone clever person once told me that where the country is dominated by poverty, we should be getting a lot of innovation, because that's where these things, you find the better ways of doing things. And perhaps we need to pay a lot of attention to that. And I like Siba's comment either, because Mr. Soto, do you remember we used to have, we were very clever those days. We used to talk about disparities between the races, black and white,
Yes.
disparities between the gender, male, female, disparities between able-bodied, disabled, and then
Yes.
urban versus rural, as Sibo was saying. We used to say that as early as those years, Siba, and we were pointing out, and you know the kind of things that happened at Denmark when Mr. Keke decided to say that we are going to build a stadium for ourselves here, and if since we don't have floodlights, we're going to use our cars to come and light as the players are practicing. And to me, he gave me that just do it mentality as such. Now, Siba, it's so disappointing that this point, or this group that is neglected, is really how I feel as someone who's been doing work in charities like foundations, make a difference foundations. I mean, you can't believe what that Francois Pinard does there. I mean, he's got 200 students already graduated in various universities, and also from these designated groups, that, so to speak. So it is really driven by what Siba alluded to, where Mr. Mbeki used to talk about two South Africas, and then two South Africas in the sense of the towns versus township.
Yeah.
And then you also, so within the rural areas themselves, there are others that are kind of the elite,
Yeah.
and others that. So when we don't do that, drilling down to those levels to get things done, we obviously are leaving out South Africans in the same way. They'll be frustrated as I'm saying that we are excluded in the main decision-making forums because of the background that we find ourselves. It's like we are going into boards through the back door rather than the
Yes.
front door. And they make, there's nothing worse than make you feel, if you are a player, a sportsman, they say you are a development sports player. It's like there's no, they don't look at your merit. They look at that you are only in this team because of the way you look like. And it's the same thinking that we say, no, if we do these towns or the township ones, you don't have to worry about the farms and the other deeper rural areas. So is the story of exclusive development. It's not getting better. It's getting worse, Siba. And I think it just takes us to actually bring these in the same way. I say we must develop a case and make a case for the things that we want done, and try and say, help us with this rather than do this for us, because nobody will listen anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Say, for you really a good chair, And I think I think we can all agree, if guys you want a chair for your board, I think this is the man. You benefit
Yes.
a lot from
Yes.
him. Yes. Any other comments or follow up before we close for today?
And if my frustration about joining boards, if there are people who also empathize with that one, that we want to get into this board so we can change the direction of thinking. Right now, I am in some boards that I'm in, and I try to make a difference. I think one of the people here is the CEO of the entity in which I'm in the board of in the Eastern Cape, dealing with electric vehicles. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Say. So we are coming now to the end of this session. I just want to thank you all for attending this webinar. I hope you found it very helpful. And also, I just want to thank Mr. Toby for his time and also this wisdom that is bringing us. I think we should bring him again in the near future to see how we can come and, because there are stories that I know you didn't cover. So
So you
about
need-
your
you need
fees
the
and
whole
the
day.
mission.
You need a whole day for.
Yes, I know it didn't cover that. So we will bring you, after a few, some time later, so that you can, touch these areas. Otherwise, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for attending this session. We hope to meet again in one of our board office hours. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Great session.